Welcome to another episode where I get to interview and have conversations with really, really interesting people. Well, I say interesting people, actually what I'm aiming for are those leaders out there, real leaders who are tried, tested and proven in their workplace. These are leaders who I've searched for around the globe, who have inspired me and who I believe have demonstrated what emotional intelligence in practice could look like. So today I'm joined by a gentleman that I've been following on social media for quite some time, to be honest, and I've really been pulled into the stuff that he's doing via his social media. We had a conversation not so very long ago, just a few weeks ago, and I knew that I'd got the right person. I want to welcome to the show today Barry Boffy MBE. Barry, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Now, I've tried to get you on here on this show for so long, and I've thought about it, and there's something that happened in your life that gave me the opportunity, or the excuse really, to reach out to you. But before we go any further, I just want to talk about some of the incredible things that you're doing. You're an award-winning inclusion and diversity thought leader. You were voted into top 100 global inspirational EDI leaders in 2021. That's some accolade there. And you're a strategic advisor and director with many organizations on all things diversity and inclusion. So I'm looking forward to having a really good conversation around diversity and inclusion. I think there are so many people who purport to be experts all of a sudden in this specific arena. I've worked in the field of diversity through my work with the Black Police Association for over 3 decades. But I know that all of a sudden, and I think it was since last year really, or since 2020, that all of a sudden I'm seeing this plethora of EDI people out there, EDI experts. But you've been doing this for some time now, Barry, haven't you?
Yeah, on and off, I suppose, for about 25 years. But the one thing I would say, and I always kind of preface any conversation, is I still wouldn't consider myself an expert, in all honesty.
That's my philosophy entirely, yes.
I don't think you can be an expert in all areas, particularly in the kind of, equality, diversity, inclusion, cultural competency field. It's always developing, always growing, always changing. And I think you're onto a bit of a losing streak if you enter into a conversation with this idea that you are the expert in that particular area. So no, I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but thank you very much for the saying so.
I think 25 years in this field sort of allows us to think of you as somewhat of an expert, but I completely agree with you on this issue of expertise. With 3 decades of leadership experience, I still don't call myself an expert. Otherwise, you lose that sort of growth mindset, don't you? We continue to grow as human beings, and we have to remain open to new learning. But let's just focus in on this 25 years. One of my burning questions is, how did you get pulled into the area of equality and diversity and inclusion? How did that all happen?
It's a bit of a strange one. I've had a number of conversations before with people who've reached out to me to say, well, how did you get where you got? What kind of career path, or what does the career path look like for people working in equality, diversity and inclusion? And the reality is, I think you probably recognise this, and a lot of my colleagues will say the same thing. There is no career path. There's no definable career path that you can really, describe to someone. If you do this A-level in equality, then it will take you on to a university degree and et cetera, et cetera. I think it has to be experiential, and it has to come from within, that passion to do the right thing, to actually make the UK or the world, effectively a better place for everyone. So it has to be something that is deeply within you first and foremost. And then it's about taking the opportunities when they present themselves, be that in a paid position or learning about something that you didn't know. So staying curious, I always want to stay curious, and then kind of developing from there. But yeah, it's a bit of a long and winding road. I think if I can describe it in that way.
I completely understand it. And, just before we press record for this show, one of the things that we were talking about, the difference between technical skills and emotional intelligence, I think you're just talking right around that subject right now, that too often organizations are looking for people with technical skills, and when they hire these people, they're a bit disappointed because there's no passion there's no depth to that person. So I know that you were the head of diversity inclusion with British Transport Police up until recently, so you'll understand the police service. I did a podcast recently with a deputy chief constable of a brand new police force over in Canada. It's called the Surrey Police Service, and you might want to listen to this show. It's with Jennifer Highland, who was their brand new deputy chief constable. Now, this police force is literally about 18 months old, and I asked her what her recruitment strategy was going to be, and she said, we're going to recruit based on values and we'll teach the technical skills later. And I thought, this is so incredible. We just wouldn't hear that in a police force in the United Kingdom unless somebody was setting up a brand new police force, I guess. But it feeds into exactly what you were talking about. So let me talk about this passion. Where does the passion for EDI come from for you?
Well, for me, I mean, I'm probably going to give my age away a little bit here, which I don't like to do, but I came of age, I became a teenager in the 1980s. So in the 1980s and into the 90s, you know, I am a gay man, and I kind of became aware of that at a time where, you know, society was, you know, effectively did not accept homosexuality in any way, shape or form. There were no real role models, particularly positive role models that you could see. I personally, you know, going through high school and into my teenage years, didn't know anyone who was gay, who was openly gay, I should say, at that time. So it was a very lonely kind of, you know, isolating place. And, you know, when you see that representation of gay men in a very negative sense, it kind of creates this environment where you can't be yourself, and you can't actually, you know, there were lots of opportunities that I think I lost or I didn't chase up because of the fact that I was worried about how I'd be perceived in that environment.
Were you literally hiding your sexuality from people?
Yes, and I was one of many at that time who would have done so. You know, like I said, I didn't know any openly gay people, male or female. I didn't, you know, I didn't know what the gay scene was. I didn't know how to find that community. You didn't see, obviously this was pre-social media, so there was no easy access to those communities that where you could find your, you know, logical family, you know, the people that you would connect with. So yes, I kept it quiet. I didn't actually effectively, I haven't ever come out, and I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago about, you know, coming out, and it's like, well, I actually haven't ever done that, and I think it's a generational thing because I, you know, went through the 80s and 90s at a time where actually it was a hostile environment for the LGBTQ plus community. You know, things have changed somewhat, still not where we need to be now, but effectively at that time it wasn't the environment where you could come out. So that's, I think, where it started. But also I was really lucky to grow up in the West Midlands, which was really kind of, you know, super diverse from a ethnic minority perspective. I went to school with a very mixed school, and that was normalised for me.
Yes, because of course we're both from the Black Country, aren't we, as well?
Absolutely, yes. Good old West Bromwich for me. And I find, you know, I think myself very lucky to have grown up in that environment, because actually difference was every day. It was normalised or usualised, I think. I don't want to use the term normal because it infers that anything other than is abnormal, but it was usualised, you know, ultimately. So I grew up in that very mixed environment. I saw difference. I saw diversity and the power of diversity, but still within myself, being a gay man, you know, it was still quite isolating and quite terrifying. And so that's where my passion has stemmed from.
I'm wondering if you had the same experience as myself. So I very often say that when I joined the police service, I moved from that very diverse West Midlands population to a predominantly white area in Derbyshire. I grew up around about the same time as yourself. I joined the police service in 1983, a year before the miners' strike, and I very often describe myself as a brown speck in a sea of white. And what I realised in my journey as I traversed through the police service was that I experienced all of the societal definitions of normal and therefore me being abnormal and how that impacted upon me. But as I grew in strength, I also learned what it feels like to be minoritized, and I recognized that I was just one member of one community that was being minoritized, and I think it increased my levels of empathy with other people who are underrepresented or minoritized. Is that something that you felt as well?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's an element of, in some environments, you can find yourself conforming, and particularly in the policing context, I think we both probably experienced that to some extent in the past, where actually you do find that you are not actively, but kind of almost surreptitiously hiding elements of yourself. So for you, that might be your kind of cultural identity or background. For me, it would have been my sexual orientation. So I was changing my behaviour in order to conform. And I think a lot of people will have done that at a certain time, and some people are still doing that now. I was so surprised in the last couple of years of my tenure at British Transport Police to hear from police officers who were joining British Transport Police, quite young people, 18, 19, 20, who were asking me, can I come out? Is this a safe environment for me to come out as a gay man or as a bisexual man or as a gay woman? Wow. And I was shocked by that. This was 2019, 2020, 2021. And I thought, is that still the perception of policing, that actually difference is no longer welcome, that you have to conform, that, your identity is not valuable? And that's, I suppose, some of the work that I was doing and, continue to do, really.
See, I find that quite powerful, Barry, that people are still asking these questions. Is it okay for me to come out in this organisation or this industry? And as much as I know the police service has done so much work around diversity and inclusion, but it just makes me wonder, are we doing the right kind of work? Is there something else that we can be doing so that people don't have to ask these kind of questions, so that people can come to work as their full self, and that we have cognitive diversity as well as cultural diversity within the police service and any other organisation or industry? What do you think we might be missing right now? What else could we do you think?
We've got to remember that, because, I have been within policing in the last 15 years, so I've seen that change. And I think a lot of the work you were just talking about is happening. It has been going on for quite some time. The reality is that that's not going to change the perception of policing for a lot of people, because there is a culture, an embedded culture, and a perception of what policing is out there for the public, the general public. And that culture change takes years. It's not something that you can just flip a switch or put a few images out into the public arena and say, look at us, we are different now.
Very true.
So, even if it does look different, because believe me, it does, in the last kind of 5, 6, 7, 8 years or so, policing is very, very different. It is full of super diverse people who revel and, in their individuality, in their individual identity. And that is used, within policing as being something valuable to policing.
I've left policing now 8 years. It'll be coming up for 8 years this year that I left policing, and in that short space of time, Barry, I have seen, just through social media, I've seen police officers, both front end and strategic, talking it with a much more human voice. Now, 8 years ago, I was on social media, I was on LinkedIn, but I was one of the very, very few on social media and LinkedIn. And it was very much sort of something that we were told not to get involved in too much. But I find now there's a different voice out there. There's a much more human voice coming from the police service. Is that what you're alluding to?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And some of that is natural. It's just people are, social media is so prolific now, everybody uses it, so people will. But a lot of it is directed. And what I mean by that is that, the senior leadership within police forces are encouraging officers to go out there and show your true self, engage with the communities that you are part of, show the human side of policing. It's really important that we do that. He says we, I still use we because I'm not long out of policing. So
I still use we, don't worry.
So yeah, a lot of it is directed. It's really important and it is encouraged. And I think that's really healthy. That shows a healthy attitude and change in attitude to the value of, a diverse workforce within policing, particularly. Now, that's going to take time, and the reality is, in the current climate, the lack of confidence in policing, is probably been at its lowest for a long time. And no amount of, real people, human people going out there and saying, I work in the policing and in the police service and it's different now, is going to change that. It's going to take a little bit more time. So yeah, there is a disparity between what the reality of policing is and what the perception of policing is, particularly outside.
You're absolutely right. And when you talk about bringing about change in any organisation, not just the police service, it's about understanding that there's a changing dynamic in the world outside of that industry or organisation that we're always going to be sort of playing catch up with as well. So to change a culture around, I think we have to get into the very DNA of the organisation. For me, when we talk about organisational culture, and I know that we had this conversation before, you say, I don't believe in organisational culture. My belief around organisational culture is I see the organisational culture as the personality of the organisation, if you like, the brand of the organisation as other people perceive it. So it really is about changing that personality. But in order to do that, we have to get into the DNA, the very DNA of the organisation. And that takes time.
And there is still some reticence, from senior leaders. And, I'm not going to name names or any particular forces or anything, but I know for those police officers who maybe have, 20, 25 years, 30 years service, and that they have a different perception of policing or what policing is now in 2022, or what it should be. So there is still some resistance and a little bit of reticence about the value of, being human, showing vulnerability. That's one of the biggest challenges that I had at British Transport Police, is actually allowing officers or encouraging officers to be individual, to show their individual identities, because there was always that perception that actually that's a vulnerability. And you can't afford to be vulnerable as a police officer.
I think you're so right. I think one of the challenges, however, with any uniformed organisation stretching it beyond the police service, is that very often you become aligned to this, what you perceive to be the personality of the organisation, what sits behind that uniform, what is the service that you do. And in order for you to deliver that service, you have to have a harder shell, and therefore you have to hide away some of your own vulnerabilities and become almost like the Iron Man or the Iron Woman, hiding behind this casing of a shell. And that, of course, that takes away from your authenticity. So I think as you get into an organisation, and the people that you described, the 25, 26, 27 year service people, we often used to call them dinosaurs. I remember when I was a young man in policing, and people used to say, oh, he's just a dinosaur, or she's just a dinosaur. And then I remember pinching myself when I got to around 26, 27 years service, and I asked myself, am I a dinosaur? Am I still reticent? Am I lacking? Am I sort of smothering creativity? And I worked really, really hard on that as a senior officer, not to become that individual. But I think it's so easy to become that because the dynamics, the culture of the organisations is almost ingrained within you by then, isn't it?
Absolutely right. Yeah, and there is an element. You spoke about uniform. I like to use uniform as a bit of a metaphor for it is a uniform. It's a shell. It is purposefully. That's why police officers in the armed services have a uniform, because there is an expectation of a position of power, but also that uniformity of decision making. In policing, you can't afford really to have 5, 6, 7, 10 officers with all a different perception or take on legislation, on the law. That's not going to work for policing, and all of those things tied. So there is a need for that uniformity of some kind.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I think back to even when I joined policing 15 years ago, so back in 2007, which is not that long ago, we understood the kind of the barrier that a uniform was, even at that time. And I think probably even earlier than that, because, and I say we understood that because when we did community engagement, I remember a lot of conversations about, well, remember when you go out to the community, don't wear your uniform. If you're going to have like a town hall meeting, take the uniform off, go in plain clothes. And it's like, well, clearly we understood that at that point 15 years ago. So why do we still struggle with that idea that the uniform is actually a barrier to engendering trust and confidence with the community?
It's interesting because I never really thought of it in that sense, because I remember we were told to take our hats off if we're going to deliver a difficult message, a death message, always come down to their height, take your hat off, so look more human as opposed to more of a police officer, be more empathic. So we were talking about empathy back then, and I think the other challenge with uniformed organizations, I mean, you can see over my shoulder here, I'm very proud of this plaque with all of my 32 years of boy to man sort of history, but you can see within that how difficult it is. The higher up you go into any leadership in any organization, you will acquire maybe some insignia, as I've got there, or some title or some status or a bigger office or higher level floor, whatever it might be in many organizations. The challenge with that is that it creates another barrier for you. It actually becomes a bigger challenge for you to remain authentic and to be the human being that you are, to bring your full self as a leader, doesn't it?
It really does, and I'm sure if you were to ask any senior officer now, if you were to ring them up now and just kind of say, how empathic are you? Are you that kind of closed off? They will say no. Of course, they will say no. Yes. But interestingly enough, the statistics always proved otherwise. And I'll give you an example of this. Working as head of inclusion and diversity, I saw that even in British Transport Police, and I'm sure it's true of other police forces, the higher up the rank you got, the less information about you was available. And what I mean by that is that, interestingly enough, we could see police officers at PC sergeant rank going into inspector who would declare on their self-declaration that they had a disability, for example, and then that disability would disappear as soon as they got higher up the rank. So as soon as they kind of hit chief inspector or superintendent, it would no longer be there. And now that's not looking at individual data because you don't see the name, but you see the ranks. And effectively, there was nobody within British Transport Police, according to our statistics, above the rank of inspector with a disability, which we knew was absolute rubbish. We knew it was rubbish. We knew that wasn't true. But it goes back to that vulnerability piece again, doesn't it?
It does indeed, yeah.
The senior officers don't want to be seen as vulnerable or actually human in some ways, because actually does that then negate their rank, their power.
I knew this was going to be a fascinating conversation, Barry, because you've now taken me into another favourite area of mine encompassing leadership, and that is around how to create functional teams within leadership, functional leadership teams. When a team is dysfunctional, you tend to find that it lacks trust. And in order for you to build trust, you have to be much more human. You have to be able to demonstrate and show your vulnerability and be able to talk about these kind of things. You need to be able to have those brave conversations, those difficult conflict conversations. You need to have healthy conflict, but you're never going to get that if you haven't got the trust. And consequently, you won't get the commitment, you won't get the accountability, etc., etc., etc. So you've just picked up on this issue of vulnerability, and I think you're absolutely right. And it's not just in the police service. This is way beyond the police service. I think in many, many organizations, when you reach beyond a certain level, you almost feel that you have to demonstrate this persona of being super strong, super resilient, super capable. And I'm not entirely sure why that is. Is that because there's a fear or do we live in a competitive kind of environment where there's a fear that I might fail and be found out? Is it imposter syndrome? Or is it playing into the DNA of the wider, deeper organizational culture that might exist? I'm not entirely sure. I've never really fathomed that one out, but it exists.
It really does. If I had the answer to that, we would have been able to resolve it a number of years ago. But you're right, you do see that, and not all the time. I have seen leaders who do kind of talk about themselves and their family and their situation, and I don't see that as a weakness. I see that as making them personable and someone I would want to work with. Ultimately, the worst leaders and managers we've ever had, in my experience at least, are those who are cold, closed to conversation, don't know anything about them in their personal life, and they're authoritative or micromanage. And actually, they're not real people. They're almost like just part of that chain of command. Whereas the best leaders I've ever had are people who I know quite well. I've got to know. I know them. I know their family. I've met their family. They talk about their family situation, what they do at the weekend. That's not a weakness. That's not showing any vulnerability there. It's showing that you're a real human being. And I'm more likely to want to work for someone like that than I am the other.
So I guess, really the challenge is we need to reduce the number of robotic leaders who just follow due process and hierarchical styles or positions to having much more transformational leaders or much more human leaders. So it's a case against the robots versus the humans again, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Inspirational and aspirational. They're the people I will follow every time.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, here's the thing. So here's that is the challenge. The challenge for people like you and I, we're trying to achieve the same thing. We're looking at it slightly differently, but we're essentially trying to achieve the same thing. I very often walk into an organization and I'll talk about the work that I do around, organizational culture, emotional intelligence, and they will say, do you know what, Kul? I understand it. I can see that it would be good, but I can't quantify the tangible benefits and how it affects my performance, my bottom line. I can't give it the priority that you're asking me to give it. So you must have come up across these situations yourself when it comes to EDI.
Yeah, it's where's the evidence? Why is this important? Why is it valuable? That there's lots of research out there that actually proves that, a diverse workforce is a more productive workforce. A workforce that can be their genuine selves is a more productive workforce, particularly in business.
Yeah.
Actually that's quite measurable. There's lots of research out there that says that's true. But actually, when you're in an organisation like in a public sector organisation like policing, well, we're not aiming for profit. We're not profit making. So almost those kind of research pieces are irrelevant. And I think so it means we have to start again with why is this important? And I think we've spoken about it already, about that kind of trust and confidence. Our job is, to work in policing with the community that we serve. We serve that community. And if we don't understand that community, we don't understand the difference, we're not part of that community, we're separate to it. So i.e. we conform to an identity, we strip away our individuality, and our true identities, then actually we're never going to have that trust and confidence. We're never going to be able to work. So there's part of your evidence for why this is important. But actually, from an internal perspective, creating a workspace where you can be your genuine self, you're going to be more productive. And again, there's lots of evidence out there saying that if you don't have to hide yourself, particularly from a sexual orientation perspective, that's been measured for years and years and years. If it's an environment where you can't come out and you can't be your genuine self, you can't talk about your same-sex partner or what you did at the weekend, or it means that people are constantly guarded, and there's a lot of energy taken up in that, hiding elements of yourself. And it means you're not going to be performing to your best. You're not going to be happy. You're not going to be enjoying the job. You're not going to be contributing in any way. So you're going to have a higher, attrition rate. People are going to leave sooner. They're not going to stay, because actually, why would you stay in an environment for the next 30 years where you're not welcome?
And that makes such perfect sense. And I think you're right. I think this is something around the public sector where certain elements of the public sector struggle to put things like EDI or culture right up there at the very top, and how you've described it, I think, is absolutely right. Now, from an evidence-based point of view, I just want to support what you said. I recently did a cultural diagnostic of a healthcare organisation, 1,400 staff. Now, the healthcare has been thrashed over the last 2 years. They've gone through the mill. They really have. So in healthcare right now, they've got highest rates of turnover in recent years. There's a limited talent pool that they can all hire from. Everyone's competing to hire from the same pond, and that pond is ever diminishing. Stress levels are high, sickness levels are high, workload is increasing because sickness levels are increasing, so consequently more pressure has been put on the reduced staff that they've got.
Yeah.
That has led to more coercive kind of leadership styles, more autocratic leadership styles, where it's very command and control. All of that, from the conversation that I've had across 30 odd focus groups, 20 odd one-to-one interviews, is that I don't feel psychologically safe. I don't feel valued. I don't feel appreciated. I don't feel happy in my work environment. And consequently, I only do what I can do. And when you hear language like that, you think, what a sad shame, because you've got an incredible individual here. And if everyone is feeling like that, you might have had an incredible organization, but you're going to struggle now to just manage the very minimum if you're not careful. So this is why it's so important to put people at the very heart of everything that you do.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where inclusion and belonging really play their part. We speak a lot around kind of the diversity of a workforce. Well, actually, achieving a statistical diverse number, that kind of aspirational target setting when it comes to, the diversity of your workforce, it doesn't help. It's not helpful, because if you haven't done the work to make sure the workplace is inclusive, that people feel that they belong and that they're valued for their difference, then actually that diversity is going to change. It's a leaky bucket. You're filling it up and it falls out the holes.
So refreshing to hear. I'm going to finish on this analogy. You're speaking my language. I often say, stop going out trying to buy the most expensive fish if when you bring them back you're going to put them into a dirty fish pond and they're not going to thrive. Then they may not even survive. Barry, I can't believe our time is up already. I could talk to you for hours, but thank you so much. Hopefully we'll meet up physically at some point. I want to wish you well in everything that you do, and thank you for everything that you have done so far. All the very best.
Thank you very much.